Hello, I am Lyndon Neri from Neri&Hu, and I'm extremely grateful today to be part of Architects, Not Architecture. So it's interesting. This is the first image of me and my grandfather when I was 4. Special image here because a year later he passed away. So he was very special to me. And to give you a little recap, my grandparents were from Qianzhou in Fujian. It is literally about an hour south of Fuzhou and about 2 hours north of Xiamen. In many ways in Fujian, it has the highest GDP because there's a lot of diasporic Chinese that goes to the Philippines, that goes to Indonesia, that goes to Singapore. And so my grandfather first moved to the Philippines, as a lot of Chinese did in that particular period of time. Didn't go to the major city in Manila or Cebu, but went down south. If you look at that map, it is that red dot. Actually, it is the south of the Philippines. Most Chinese do that. They go to one city and they feel like if there's a lot of competition, they go to the next city. And then when there's more Chinese, they go to other city. And so Changzhou today, extremely rich in culture. And there's a reason behind that. This was the first store that my parents and my grandparents, they didn't really speak the language. They only speak a Chinese dialect called Fujian. And so that's my grandparents and my dad. Actually, interestingly enough, if you look at the sign, some of them are in English, some of them are in Malay, some of them are in Chinese, not in this one, in Spanish. It's called Farmacia. You can see that. It's actually an Edwards Fine Furniture. Is my uncle, their youngest boy, so they call it Edwards Fine Furniture. And you'll see later why I have a furniture store here in Shanghai. It's kind of probably in the DNA, interestingly enough. This is my older brother and me. I like to make things ever since I was a kid. I also like to draw. You can see this is me in the picture right there to the third to the right. And my sister was not born then, but I put my sister to the right, the image there during my graduation at Berkeley. My sister is an amazing graphic designer who also worked for us for many years or worked with us. I went to a Chinese school in the Philippines. This is 1972, if you can read Chinese. And this was when I was in kindergarten. And so you can kind of see there's a mixture of a number of, we had to learn Spanish, a little bit of the Filipino language, and of course, Chinese. Interestingly enough, during that period of time, President Marcos and Imelda ruled the Philippines very strongly. Marcos became the president in 1965. And Imelda in the 70s commissioned many amazing projects. And there's one of my favorite was actually Tanghalang Pambansa, which means the cultural center of the Philippines. It's by Locsin, Leandro Locsin, who also went to the GSD. Probably one of the most famous Filipino architect. Coincidentally, this was photographed by Simone Bossi, who also photographed our latest project in Paris. So it's kind of interesting if you were to look at the fate of sort of the transitional period of our time. But at that time, aside from Japan, the Philippines was really quite powerful and very rich. Then I went to prep school in the US. I played basketball. You can see the Sports Illustrated there with the yellow thing. I was initially a Portland Trailblazer fan. Then I became Golden State Warriors fan. Not when they were winning, when they were losing. There was this guy called Lloyd B. Free, and I used to call myself Lyndon World B. Free Neri. And you can kind of see here I am, small. Obviously, Curry changed the whole game. Unfortunately, 20 years too late. It's great for short people, but at that time, you know, with my height, there was no way it was possible. These are my drawings in high school. I always loved to draw, but then again, you know, being raised in an Asian family, specifically Chinese school in the Philippines, it was all very realistic. So I was not encouraged. It was not until I went to Berkeley, I lied to my father. I told him that I was studying engineering, when in fact I was painting in the art department. My first instructor was Joan Brown, part of the Bay Area figurative movement. She unfortunately died from her own sculpture in India. That was really sad and very sudden during that period of time. The Bay Area figurative movement had people like Richard Dibincourt and Manuel Neri, not related to me. He taught at UC Davis, but also at the same time would come to Berkeley periodically, and I took classes with him. I was, however, very curious with what's happening in New York, and that was with Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. Robert Rauschenberg, purely from its sort of the idea of collage. And this was my first year at Berkeley when I start to sort of venture away from realism and start to say, what if I start playing with this notion of collage? Of course, my dad decided to come to the US, and I kind of panicked because I lied to him that I was in engineering school and I had to transfer, and there's no other place, but architecture school was the only way that would accept me. And so I transferred literally across the street, which is Worcester Hall, designed by Eschrick. But during that time, there was this strong influence by MLTW, which is Moore had just left, stepped down, Donlin Linden, Richard Whittaker, and William Turnbull, and of course, Joseph Eschrick was there. That was really strong, the Bay Area influence. I was, however, more interested with what Jim Jennings, Mark Mack, or Stanley Sadowich, I mean, they were looking at houses by Schindler, by Eames, the Koenig houses. So it was sort of that LA, sort of Bay Area kind of conflict. So I'm constantly in this place of conflict. And it was interesting because my junior year, there was this man called Michael Graves who came to Berkeley. And I remember they had to move that lecture hall from the architecture auditorium, which only sits about 200 people, to Wheeler Auditorium, which sits about 750 people. And I remember he walked in, and he was doing the competition for the Klaus Pegasus. And at that time, he was competing against Mark Mack and Andrew Beatty, Daniel Solomon. Robert Mangorian was teamed up with James Turrell. And I remember him going in with a cloak and a whole group of people, and someone screamed, goes, Mr. Graves, how does it feel like to be the Jesus Christ of architecture? And that was shocking to me because I've never really seen this kind of work, this kind of drawing, the proficiency. During that particular period of time when I was an undergraduate, there was a man called Yong-Ho Chang, who became the dean at MIT, probably the first. He was in graduate school at Berkeley at that time. It was interesting because right after, during the graduate program, I was really fascinated because some of his projects were really quite intriguing and dealing with a lot of issues that I was not used to. And when he came out, he did this project, which was the bookstore that had wheels as apparatus. And I thought that was really fascinating to have a Chinese architect coming home, going back to Beijing and doing something rather conceptual. Before I graduated, this was the first time I saw Salk Institute, and that was when I was really in awe, and I realized, whoa, the power of architecture. It's not just about fanciful drawing, but really the power of space. And then obviously I went to the Graduate School of Design. This was when I was on my younger days, and you can kind of see the map when I went from the East Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast. That was a time when Rafael Moneo, I came in towards the tail end of Rafael Moneo's chairmanship at Harvard. He was revered and he was feared. He was also my thesis advisor. But at that same time, there was also another duality. I was dealing again with another kind of tension because he brought in Rem Koolhaas, and you can kind of see you're either the OMA camp or the Rafael Moneo camp, and you have to choose side. There were also, even between the reading and the publication at the GSD, you have Wilfred Wang, who talked about tectonics, 9H, and talks about sort of details, spaces, and then you have Michael Hayes, who deals with narrative, conceptual ideas. And so assemblage and 9H were dealing with two different issues, and yet that tension was good for the school. These were the seminal work that was influencing at that time, people like Alvaro Siza, Heinz Benfield, the Herzog de Meuron's earlier work. And I remember the exhibition by Miralles that really shocked me to my core. How could a drawing be so full of energy at the same time, had so much life? All of a sudden I realized, well, architecture could be really extremely spatial. And of course, Peter Zumthor came to play. He came to school later, 2-3 years later, and started teaching at the GSD. I remember that he decided to have his studio at the Carpenter Center because he thought that the GSD, the building was not good enough. Therefore, he was going to teach at the Le Corbusier. And this is when I graduated. I got married after my graduation. To the left, again, there's that tension. I'm showing you sort of the duality in my life, the constant tension. I was married in a Julia Morgan building, which is really sensitive. And to the right was my reception, which was in the Deacon Law, Roach Deacon Law Oakland Museum. So you can kind of see sort of the brutalist modernist and the sensitive Bay Area kind of architecture. It was also that time I was in a shop full of snow, you see to my waist. That's when we moved to Princeton. That's when Rosanna went to graduate program. I worked in New York for 2 years. Here, me and Rosanna, very young. We were naive, a little stupid. And 2 years later, Rosanna's like, I'm so tired of constantly picking you up in the train. Please try somewhere in Princeton. So there was only one office, and that was Michael Graves. So you kind of see that was my office, a little bit messy with drawings all over my table. And also at that time, you can kind of see the influence. Michael was friends with Aldo Rossi, Ettore Sottsass, and he was really much influenced his drawing by, Di Chirico and Morandi. And obviously this was also a way for me to start thinking. And I traveled with him to Asia, different parts, competition in Singapore, exhibition in Japan. And obviously, Michael has a lot of strong influence on us. Sort of the Renaissance movement was really preeminent in a lot of the way he thinks. Sort of Tempietto and Cloister by Bramante resonated well with me. How a small building could be so significant, and yet at the same time, the opposite, which is a cloister rather big, can be really small. This is our first house in Princeton, New Jersey. This was when Michael came and we were commissioned to do 3 on the Bund. This is across from 3 on the Bund, the building before it got renovated. And you have to remember the first time I came here, even though 3 on the Bund was an amazing project because I love to eat and I love to cook, I realized that the soul of 3 on the Bund was the art gallery. And I have to give credit to a man called Handel Lee. He was the visionary behind the project. And he partnered with someone named Wong Ling, which a lot of you know. And this was the first in which you have people like Zhang Xiaogang's work, and you have people like Wang Ningde's photograph, and you have people like Zhou Cunya's work, The Green Dog. And I still regret today because I wish I bought that green dog because it was so cheap then. It was offered to me and I'm thinking, how could a green dog be 20,000 US dollars? But now, of course, it's a lot more. But you see the bloodline, you see a lot of these work. So I was working on that project and we were asked to move here to actually run the project to complete it. And so this was a month before I moved to Shanghai with my 3 kids. My youngest was 3 months old. Now he is about to go to college. So that's how time flies. And then during my time when we moved here, SARS hit. So it was supposed to be 6 weeks. It became 4 months. And then I stayed in Shanghai for 10 months to run a project called 3 on the Bund. And obviously after that, I resigned and I started my practice. You see the practice when we had 6 people at that time. And it was also very disturbing because the city was a major construction site. The word Cai was everywhere. You can kind of see everywhere in the city. And yet, despite sort of this whole kind of negative energy, there was also a positive energy. Shanghai became to me a sense of community, a place where people actually gather together, which I find interesting. But having said that, then I realized sort of the issue of how the urbanization is changing. Jia Zhangke's movie called Film Steel 24 City, and the idea of Kantab Nadir's notion of photograph in Chongqing, and the idea of altering the texture of daily life, giving rise to new notions of urban leisure. All of a sudden, what is commonly seen as leisure in parks, all of a sudden you're under freeways. Very interestingly, so issues like memory and loss and pain become important to us. Work by Louis Bourgeois, work by Mona Hatem about displacement. about not having her own home, and obviously Rachel Whiteread, the place in East London, a cast of an existing building that was demolished. And obviously the idea, our obsession with repetition and typology, the Deutsch School of Photography, the idea of sort of repetition and layering typology, the dogmatic insistence and studies of type became something important. And obviously, we were fortunate enough to invite Candida over for one of the talks at the Festival of Design. We didn't have projects when we started, so we were rather foolish when we came here. So when we left after being here, after Three in the Blend completed, I resigned from Michael Graves after 10.5 years. So I did products. I did small objects, small things. I did publication. Rosanna and I did publication. We did a book called Persistence of Vision, which was published in 2007, interviewing 50 different architects, famous, not famous, local, international. As long as you are practicing in China, we will interview you and we will film you. And it was at that same time we came across a book called The Future of Nostalgia, written by a Harvard professor called Svetlana Boym, and the notion of reflective nostalgia. And we find this quite interesting as an apparatus. She argues that perhaps nostalgia is not so bad if it's not seen in a restorative vein, but rather from a reflective vein. And if you see it from a reflective vein, that perhaps it can inform you of a possible future, that it longs itself and delays the homecoming. And with that, this was actually good reading before we embarked on our first project. This was obviously before Waterhouse got transformed. This was the existing, and so we actually became very conscious of all the existing condition in there. And you can kind of see how we worked. I like to draw ever since and so what I do is I do a lot of drawings. This was part of sort of sketches from Waterhouse and from product, and you can kind of see the influence by Aldo Rossi, a little bit of Alvaro Siza. Many of sort of the influences are seen in sort of a lot of my sketches. But during the same time, when we were building our practice, granting we didn't really have that much architecture initially, there were a lot of prolific architects practicing. One of them will be the speaker tonight after this, which is Dong Kong. The library in, we call the Lonely Library. But at the same time, there was also Neri&Hu and Huang Wenxing from Rice and Princeton. You have people like Ma Yansong and Hua Li from Yale, and you have Zhang Ke from Harvard, and all of them coming back to, this is what I call the practice coming from the north, mostly from Tsinghua, and obviously architects from the south, people from Wangshu, Arch Union, Liu Yicun. There are more, obviously. I'm just giving you an example of sort of the breadth and the wealth of architects practicing at that time. Interior product design, not so much. Graphics, not even. But when it comes to architecture, there was a real experimentation of vibrancy to that place. But it was not just China. If you look at Southeast Asia and you look at South Asia, you see people like Bangkok Studio, you see Vo Trong from Vietnam, you see Marina Tosbom, you see Studio Mumbai, you see Woha from Singapore, and of course, my dear friend Andra Martin, who is really, in many ways, needs more attention globally. And so with that, you know, with the idea of sort of this old and new that we had to deal with, we start looking into Carlos Scarpa more. We didn't look at them seriously in terms of dealing with old and new, you know, Quirino, Stampiglio, and Castelvecchio, and obviously Leverage in terms of enigmatic in form and in terms of materiality. Having said all that, obviously Jeffrey Bauer in terms of dealing with new tropical modernism and how architecture and landscape comes together. And I remember seeing Maison de Vere for the first time in E1027 by Eileen Gray, and I realized, whoa, this is interesting, sort of the idea of total design. And when we talk about total design, again, our work, we're limited to a lot of interiors, so we decide, why don't we create a platform? Why don't we bring the best of what the world can offer in terms of furniture to China, and hopefully one day to be able to bring back the best of China back to the world. So we created a store for furniture, but at the same time, we also created this sort of forum, this lecture called Festival of Design. It's on its 7th year right now. COVID last year, we didn't do it. So we invited many speakers, including the speaker that's coming after me, Dong Gong. Obviously, we had some people like Zhang Yonghe, people like Zhang Ke, and obviously we also have people that are Asian counterparts and sort of internationally product designers, architects, industrial designers. And the last few years, we've concentrated and we've gone back to the US to teach. This was in 2018 at Yale. It was interesting because this was actually a year before Henry Cobb passed away. So it was good to be in that same review with him. You see Peter Eisman in there. And obviously at Harvard, being in reviews, having our own studio, dealing with issues that we're interested in, and reconnecting with peers like Mauricio and Sophia, Kirsten Gears. I hardly see Zhang Ke and Stan Feng in China, but then when we were at Harvard, I actually see a lot of them. So it was a great reunion. Obviously, to close this 27 years after graduation, I was able to see Rafael Maneo last March before COVID went really crazy, hand him our first monograph. And he was kind enough to say he's willing to write the foreword for our second monograph, which is coming out this summer. So we're extremely excited. This is our office. This was my drawing, a photograph and pastel drawing with ink on top as my Christmas gift to a number of good friends around the world. And I close this with a quote by Carl Gustav Jung in relationship to sort of the situation we are in. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Lyndon.
Thank you.
It was beautiful. Wow, so many insights in only 21 minutes.
I had to rush that really quickly. So I was on a marathon.
That was beautiful. Thank you a lot for your time, for participating. We really appreciate it. We wanted to ask you the first question, of course, about Rosanna. We have read in many interviews that you are quite different. How is the collaboration between the two of you?
Rosanna is an extremely organized individual, extremely intellectual and extremely logical. She thinks before she opens her mouth. She doesn't have a temper. She's very calm. She manages the offices very strongly. I'm out of control. I'm emotional. I get excited. I lose temper. So I like, sometimes when I don't get my way, I get really upset. I walk out of meetings and she stays in meetings. She thinks oftentimes when you come to the office, because I always smile, most of the staff think I'm the nice one. And she's very serious that she's the serious one. But if you work here long enough, you will know that I'm the crazy one. We are very different, but we are very similar. We're both, we sort of, space is very important, and sort of the tectonic of architecture is very important. He likes to think, she likes to write, I like to draw. I'm into basketball, she's into music. We both love to eat, we both love art. And so it complements, and I tend to be a bit more on the conceptual schematic side. She's very good at DD, and I come in during construction again. So we kind of play different roles. Yeah.
And you play different roles. But is there something you would like to learn from her?
Oh yeah, patience. She's very resilient and extremely patient. She gets things done. I have a lot of ideas, but sometimes I get so frustrated and I would just walk away because I feel like it's compromise. I'm too much, we're both idealistic, but Rosanna is idealistic in a practical way. I'm idealistic in an unreasonable way.
That sounds great. And that's a good quality to learn. You mentioned the expectations from your parents. At that time, you even changed the university. So your parents had big expectations on you. What expectation do you have on your kids?
You know, I have actually quite the opposite, precisely because my parents, they're typical Chinese parents. So they want us to either be, I mean, economists, engineers, doctors, or lawyers. I mean, people say that a lot, but it's real. For me, it was engineering. I was good with math and I was good with science when I was young. Thank goodness I'm not in that field. I actually have the opposite. I told my kid, in fact, I would tell my kid, my daughter is an extremely amazing painter. She's in her second year at Harvard right now, and she's thinking of economics. She's thinking of, I said, why are you going to economics? Why are you studying? Why don't you do painting? And I will support you. So I have the opposite. I feel like my kids needs to really pursue their passion. But maybe there needs to be an in-between.
That sounds very nice. You also mentioned during your presentation that at your beginnings you struggled getting new projects, right? And you do the book products. In one previous conversation, you mentioned that last year you received 300 requests and you only selected a couple of them. Which is great, but it was not always like that. What advice do you have for young practitioners that struggle to get new projects?
I think to be true to yourself. I think to really understand that architecture is for people who really are passionate about what they do. It's not a place to make money. It's not a profession to make money. And if you want to make money, you might as well buy stocks or go to real estate or do all these other things. I think you need to have a commitment and a passion to be able to go through the difficult period and be true to yourself. Don't try to be something else. Be really passionate about what you do, and don't look at the trend and see, well, this is, you know, the trend that architects today are doing one thing and therefore I should do this particular style. You should be true to what you really think is true, your own conviction. And
actually, we have one question from the audience, which is if you think creativity is innate.
Interesting. That's a very, very good question. I would not know that answer. I think there's two components to it. There's creativity comes in different fashion. What is really creativity? Some people say you're good in drawing. Some people you think creatively. Some people who are good in drawing might not be able to create spaces. And some people who are created spaces might not be able to draw. And some people might be creative with their words. They're good writers. I do believe that what's important, what's innate in human being, what is needed is every society needs musicians, artists, architects, writers, because they represent sort of the thinking of a city. If it's just full of business people and lawyer, then the city does not have a character. It doesn't have its strength. So I do think there is also one aspect that could be trained, the discipline of it.
That's very interesting. Also, your last quote during your presentation was beautiful, and one of the advice we have read about you is one from your dad. In an interview, you say that humility is the most important thing. Why is that, and how humility helps you as an architect?
You know, I always believe, and I've said this many times, I'm a man who believes that there is a God above. People often say that because maybe you were brought up in the Philippines, it's an extremely Catholic country. But I do believe that there is a higher being that gives us this opportunity and gives us this set skills and give us this talent. And a lot of us are given different skills to be able to contribute to the world. And oftentimes the noises and the praises of this world confuses us. And sometimes we start to think that we are greater than who we are. And as architects, I think this is very important. When we're given a platform, when we're given opportunity, you know, oftentimes I turn to Rosanna and I often have a very simple prayer. You know, I said, God, who am I that you are mindful of? Who am I that you are mindful of? That you give us so many opportunities, so many projects. These are platform for us, not just for us, but for a group of us to be able to explore issues and be able to help and give back to humanity. And I think humility is key. I think if you think yourselves more highly than who you are, then I think the practice is in jeopardy.
That sounds very honest and very nice of you to hear that. Also, you have a team of about 200 people. Some of your former members are being also successful with their own practices now, so you can see how it grows, right?
Yes, we don't have 200. I wish we have 200. No, we only have about 100.
But
yes.
with Design Republic,
with Design Republic, yes, with Design Republic, yes, Design Republic, we have maybe about 170. With that's a completely different company, different group of people running the business.
But still,
yes.
A lot of former.
Yes, we have seen a lot of architects, product designers, interior designers that have started their own practices, and I'm very happy to see them doing well. I get worried about them just like a father would, and oftentimes I would ask them how they're doing, whether they have enough work, because I think there's that sense of responsibility, both Rosanna and myself.
It was wonderful to listen to your talk and see your presentation. Thank you a lot for your time or your kind participation. We look forward to the conversation with Gong in about half an hour. But first, thank you a lot, and we'll see you later. Thank you, Lyndon.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.